He cheated and thought silence would protect him. Instead, I rewrote his life, quietly, legally, and with a cruelty that felt like sunrise. I didn't scream. I didn't post screenshots. I dismantled everything he used to hide behind, and watched, calm, as his perfect life quietly fell apart. People always ask how it started. They want a scene, the lipstick on a cuff, the reckless text, a cinematic reveal. I never had one. My story was a slow leak, a pinprick that wore my heart down until the fabric gave. You remember the easy kind of love, the kind that arranges itself in your life like furniture you don't notice anymore. Evan and I were that. 4 years of habit, coffee mugs that fit in each other's hands, playlists that blended, a dog named Cooper who always chose my lap. He worked in real estate, liked suits he didn't need, and had a laugh that made people trust him before they judged him. I worked nights at the hospital, held families when life collapsed, and came home with scrubs smelling faintly of disinfectant and the island of our apartment waiting. If you had asked me on any given Tuesday whether I trusted him, I would have said yes without thinking. That kind of trust sits in the body, in the way you breathe, in the way you make space for someone else's life inside your own. It's messy and ordinary. It's making room for extra toothbrushes and not noticing the little debts one partner owes the other because, to you, we is one thing. And that's exactly why his betrayal hurt. Not because it was loud. Because it was bureaucratic. It cost me nothing dramatic. No shattered dishes, no violent confrontation. But it cost me time, dignity, and the quiet belief that my small sacrifices were seen. It began as a collection of small habits. His phone face down, a closed door in the home office, late client dinners that smelled faintly of someone else's perfume. He became distracted with his phone during dinners, scrolling, thumbs twitching at late messages. He laughed less at my jokes. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the shift work made everyone tired. 2 weeks after I started noticing, I found a name saved as AK Plumbing. Not unusual in itself, we'd had the sink fixed last spring, except the number traced to a woman's profile online. Amber K. She had photos in sunglasses and a laugh that looked like she believed she'd always be charming. The call history showed hour-long chats at midnight, the texts truncated like rehearsed lines. Call you later, well, can't wait. I didn't explode. I didn't grandstand. I sat on the couch and stared until the afternoon light turned sharp and honest on the coffee table. Betrayal, when it's this quiet, makes you a mathematician of emotion. You add up little things and the sum is a new shape of truth. The amount of time he spent away. The way he flinched when I mentioned dates. The way he said, "You worry too much, Lena," with pity like a spoonful of medicine. That night when he came home smelling like a perfume I didn't own, I made him dinner and set his plate like a ritual. I noticed the tremor in his hand when he lifted his wine glass. He was good at pretending. He had to be. He'd been practicing for years. With clients, with colleagues, with friends. That's the thing about men like Evan. They learn to be believable before they learn to be faithful. By the 3rd week, the decision wasn't a dramatic, sudden choice. It was a calculus. I could call him out and create a scene where he could explain away, apologize, and everyone would expect me to take him back because that's how these stories are supposed to resolve. Drama feeds attention, and attention feeds the kind of man who cheats. He would likely own it for a day, be contrite for a week, and then without consequences slip back into the same pattern. Or I could do something quieter, crueler in its necessity. Take away the things he used as scaffolding until he had no audience left to perform for. That's where the gray begins. I wasn't interested in exposing him with screenshots on social media. I wanted to remove the scaffolding he leaned on, his assumptions, his credit illusions, the small day-to-day conveniences that made him feel like a winner. I wanted him to face the practical fallout of his choices without me as a safety net. It sounds petty if you say it like that. But care has a cost. For 3 years, when his rent fell late, I covered it. When his car needed new brakes, I paid. When Dad's surgery left him short, I refinanced my savings to help him and received thanks like a reflex. It wasn't martyrdom. It was the quiet expectation he designed. So I started planning. A good plan begins with observation. Not spying in some ridiculous thriller sense. More like an audit. For weeks I watched the patterns of his life as though cataloguing a patient. When does he check his email? Who are the people who show up in photos more than once? What claims does he make that sit uncomfortably with reality? I kept my face the same. Smiled at him in the mornings. Refilled his coffee. I texted "love you" and meant it in the old small habitual way, even as the new math of US was changing in my head. I kept a small notebook. Not a manifesto, just facts. Dates, little notes, the names of companies he mentioned that sounded too glossy. I logged when he said he had a client dinner and when his Venmo showed outgoing cash at 2 in the morning. I reconciled claims against receipts and the occasional ad he'd bragged about for a moment on social media. Men who build a persona often forget that facts are porous. Public claims don't always match bank ledgers. Then I did something practical. I centralized my finances. I pulled every joint thing we had into a spreadsheet, shared utilities, the cable account he had insisted be in my name because I'm better at this stuff, the credit card with both our signatures where he had the higher credit line. He had built an image around being fiscally golden. I had been the one keeping the engine oil topped up. The plan began to take shape. I would not alter anything dramatic overnight. Instead I prepared layers of small lawful redirects, a rerouting of autopay here, a change of primary contact there, all the while documenting why these moves were being made. I was not reckless. I wanted evidence, not theatrics. He had 3 vulnerabilities, and each one shaped a strand of my approach. Reputation and image. Evan's life depended on others seeing him as sharp, capable, and financially in control. He had clients, listings, and an Instagram full of staged success. The plan: introduce small truths that would erode his credibility slowly. Not slander, but evidence that would be hard for him to perform with. I would not call his clients or post his secrets. I would let his own slips, unprotected in the world he'd built, meet consequences. Financial dependence on my labor. He relied on me to be the steady accountant of our household without ever seeing it. I would stop being the easy fix. I would transition accounts, remove my card from autopay, and insist that he call to set up his own arrangements. He'd be forced into adulting. Publicly. Social standing. He loved being the anecdotal success story, at barbecues. I planned to allow the personal cracks to become known not as a smear campaign, but as natural outcomes of normal life. Missed payments, a late notice in a mailbox, a declined card at a restaurant. Embarrassment is slow, but it is surgical. Everything I did remained non-violent and within the law. There was, however, morally gray territory. Withholding emotional labor, engineering social inconveniences, and leveraging private knowledge to ensure consequences. I justified it to myself because it was proportional to the invisible cost he'd exacted. Step 1. Insurance and banks. I scheduled a long day off and sat at my kitchen table with a horizon of open tabs. I called the bank and changed my contact email on a few accounts, making sure that notices were routed to me where appropriate. On accounts that were technically his responsibility but had been in my name for convenience, I began the process of transferring ownership. I did it methodically, small shifts, so that when the consequences arrived, they would look like administrative issues rather than sabotage. Step 2. Autopay and subscriptions. Little conveniences create the illusion of stability. I removed my card from the accounts I'd been maintaining, his phone, the car insurance, the shared utilities, and left friendly notes on the accounts explaining the transition. I sent polite emails. Please update primary payment method to Evan Morgan. No threats. No drama. Just the bureaucratic truth. I printed everything. Statements, dated messages, receipts. Not to expose him publicly, but so I had a ledger of what I'd done and why. This would be crucial if he tried to paint me as vindictive later. Evidence is a moral equalizer. It keeps you honest in your own head. This is the grayest part and why, if you plan a story like this, you must be careful. Evan's business relied on referrals and relationships. I had access to one of his referral sources, a group of neighborhood homeowners who loved him because he'd sold a lot of houses locally. I didn't call them to tell them he cheated. I called them to ask for advice, phrased neutrally. Evan mentioned you recently about a listing. I'm trying to understand how local referrals are handled. They answered candidly, and one or two things he'd neglected slipped into the conversation. It wasn't blackmail. It was the kind of information that, when paired with normal life failing, a late mortgage notice, cancelled showing, would tip his public image from polished to troubled. The advantage of indirectness is it doesn't smell like revenge. It smells like life. We'd moved in a community where reputations were currency. I started small. At the dog park, I mentioned to a neighbor how I'd been handling the utility transfers because we were tightening our budget. At coop meetings, I mentioned how business was slow for many agents with the market cooling. Nothing slanderous, but a consistent narrative that even successful people could get caught short. People repeated it. Gossip is a force multiplier when you seed it with fact. He asked for a weekend to reconnect. He said the word like an incantation, thinking it would bend me back into place. He wanted a cabin by the river, a cliché apology scene. I agreed, of course. I planned the trip myself. The cabin was the perfect stage. Small, quiet, with a town that didn't offer anonymity. I let him think this was reconciliation. I kept my face warm, my voice steady, and tucked the real purpose in my pocket. On the morning he was supposed to receive a surprise visit from Amber, a fracture I'd noticed in a text he'd left open once. I needed coffee in the next town over. I checked into a motel under my name, sat in the lobby with a latte, and watched him on my laptop. I'd set up a mirrored view of his social feed out of curiosity more than vindictiveness. It was small tech stuff, a glimpse into how visible lives are now. Amber arrived at the cabin like any other surprise guest would. Slightly giddy, expecting drama. He was flustered, and clearly hadn't planned how to explain the separation he'd been building in his head. She left bewildered. He called me frantic. I listened to him try to rearrange the narrative and offered a calm voice. We'll talk when you get home. What happened next wasn't spectacular. He came back from the cabin less polished. Small details leaked, a notice from the HOA that I'd forwarded months before because I'd been handling it, an email from the phone company saying a card had failed because he'd forgotten to update it, those dominoes I'd set earlier. They toppled. He applied for a new listing and was surprised to find himself without enough liquidity for the earnest money. He called me asking for help and I said, no. The denial hit him hard, not just in his bank account, but in his pride. He had built a life of performance and no fallback. Now, the performance had a gap. At first, his friends made excuses. Evan's busy, they said. He'll get back on his feet. But then another client experienced a scheduling error because his assistant hadn't been paid. Then a late fee for a listing. Then a lender's email about requirements. Each was mundane. Each was public. The slow loss of trust is worse than a single scandal because it grows roots in practical failure. He came to my door the day his credit card was declined at a restaurant downtown. I opened the door and watched his face change from baffled to furious to begged. Lena, this is ridiculous, he said. You can't do this. I felt no satisfaction in his collapse, only a quiet sense of justice. He asked about the transfers. I told him the truth. I removed my card. I moved accounts that were only in my name. You can fix it today if you call these numbers. I handed him the list I'd prepared. Practicality has a cruelty all its own. He left, muttering something about lawyers. Somewhere in this process, I realized I wasn't purely punishing him. I was creating a mirror. The things that had seemed quaint, his obsession with image, his need to be seen as invulnerable, were being reflected back at him through consequences. When he lost a client because a contract fell through because he'd missed a payment, he had to explain in clear human terms, I screwed up. Not the performative, I'm so sorry, babe he'd given me earlier, but a public apology in front of a vendor who wanted to know if he could be trusted. The moral gray sits in the satisfaction. I had not spread lies. I had not broken into his accounts or forged anything. I had stopped propping up the story he'd told the world, that he was steady, secure, infallible. Instead, I let reality exert itself. It is important I say this plainly. Revenge that leans into gray territory asks a lot of you. It asks you to keep clean lines for yourself so you don't become the villain you condemn. I consulted with friends about steps that could be misinterpreted and documented each action. I wanted no legal or moral ambiguity I couldn't defend. Even as I intended harm, I wanted it to be honest harm, consequences of inaction, not a lie told to hurt. The day he knocked on my door to beg, I thought about the man who'd kissed my forehead in mornings that felt small and safe. That man was still inside the shell of the person who'd betrayed me. I could have exploded. I could have posted everything on a platform that thrives on scandal and ruin. I decided not to. Instead, I told the truth. Not a flourish, not a speech. A ledger. Here are the accounts. I slid the binder across the kitchen table like nobody's hero. He saw the dates, the transfers, the polite emails informing providers of changes. He scanned, thumbed pages like someone trying to learn a foreign language quickly. "You did all this," he whispered. The man who once swaggered had to ask permission to understand the consequences of his actions. "Yes," I said. I removed the crutch. He asked for an apology. Not for what he'd done, but for the way I'd taken away his safety net. "You're cruel," he accused. There was some truth in that. Cruelty is a flavor of honesty when the alternatives are endless apologies that lead nowhere. "I'm not cruel. I'm boundarying," I said. "You made your choices." Maybe he expected me to be vindictive, to hand him a list and demand humiliation. But that wasn't the point. My revenge had no appetite for spectacle. It wanted his life to reflect his actions. It wanted him to earn the stability he'd assumed. In the months after, his life was a quieter kind of collapse. The drama of social media didn't happen. He was too small a celebrity for that. Instead, he suffered a day-by-day erosion. Clients drifted when deadlines slipped. Friends made excuses at first, but distance grows with the seasons. Inconveniences are not crimes but annoyances, and acquaintances stop excusing them. He moved apartments when lease renewal became a nightmare of misaligned paperwork and bad credit. He went to therapy, which I noted quietly, not out of schadenfreude but because any kind of learning matters. Amber left him eventually. People like her are not immune to the economics of shame either. Being attached to someone with a declining professional reputation is bad optics. She didn't come to me. She didn't send a note. The universe was quieter than that. I didn't celebrate. I felt relief, yes, a warm, uncomplicated relief that comes from removing a burden. But I also felt the melancholy of someone who'd been teaching herself how to live with less emotional labor. I had paid for years with small, invisible transactions. "I'll handle it, hon," turned into taxi rides, late fees, and a personality that shrank in the face of need. Removing myself was not always joyous. It was sober. It asked me to relearn how to make decisions that centered me. For the record, in case anyone plans something like this or wants to understand the method behind the moral gray, here's a clear explanation of what I did and why it was effective. Audit everything. Start by listing every joint or assumed, shared account. That includes utilities, phone plans, streaming services, credit cards, and any recurring autopays. People assume joint means legally joint. Often it's twisted. One name holds everything for convenience. I documented every such account. Document patterns. Keep a private record, dates, receipts, screenshots. This isn't for revenge alone, it's to protect yourself if later accused of wrongdoing. Documentation keeps you honest. Make incremental, legal changes. Don't try to be a saboteur. Instead, transition accounts into appropriate ownership. Call the provider, say, "I'm updating the primary payer to so-and-so." Make sure providers are told facts. Change the billing contact. Put notices in writing. The goal is to remove your automatic cover, not to create fake debts. Remove your card, don't cancel the service. If there's a card on file in your name, remove it and notify the provider politely that the new primary payer will be Evan. This ensures when it fails, it's because he didn't take action, not because you intentionally cut him off. Leverage reputation with neutral conversation. Ask his clients or mutual contacts neutral questions that reveal real expectations. How many showings do you expect in a week? Or what's the usual turnaround? This can produce facts that reveal neglect without you having to accuse. It's gray because you're using information asymmetry, not lies. Create natural consequences. Allow missed payments and missed deadlines to occur because the other party hasn't taken responsibility. Consequences are powerful teachers. They are quiet, non-performative punishments. Keep legal and ethical boundaries. Don't fake charges, don't forge documents, don't hack accounts. Those actions cross into criminal territory. The point of gray revenge is to make the person deal with the reality their choices created, not to zero them out illegally. Provide options for repair, but don't rescue. When they ask for help, give them the tools but not the money. Here are the numbers to call. Here's what they'll ask. This forces ownership. Protect yourself emotionally. Expect the aftershocks. People will test you. Friends may take sides. Hold your center. Document interactions where necessary. Let silence be the message. The biggest weapon was never making a spectacle. The quiet absence of rescue forces a person to face themselves in the empty space you leave. This is what I did, and the result was not a headline. It was a life nudged into honesty. Gray. Yes. Effective. Also yes. People often think revenge is about hurting someone until they feel what you felt. That's a juvenile instinct. The kind that lasts, the revenge that teaches and echoes, is the one that forces a person to repair what they broke or to watch their life rearrange itself in ways that make performance impossible. I told my story in a way that honored my own dignity. I did not traumatize anyone beyond what they'd already done to themselves. I did not choose humiliations. I chose consequences. And consequences are not personal cruelties. They are moral mechanics. They make people accountable when the softer tools we relied on are taken away. There were nights, of course, when I second-guessed myself. When I paid my own rent and felt the lack of his hand in an empty bed, I wondered whether the quiet I'd chosen was fair. Revenge has a cost. You must live with the person you become afterward. I became more careful with money, savvier with paperwork, and clearer with boundaries. I became someone who could ask for help and expect reciprocity. None of that was small. Months later, a neighbor asked me, over coffee at the alley mural, if I had regretted what I did. Sometimes, I said. Mostly not. I thought about how many people live propped up by invisible labor, partners, parents, friends, and how often the word love is used as a receipt rather than a relationship. Cooper still curls into my lap at night. I work the shifts I want. I take vacations I never felt entitled to. People ask how I managed the transition so gracefully. There was no grace, really, just intention and stubbornness and a refusal to let my identity be reduced to a balance sheet. Evan's path is his own. I run into him sometimes, at a mutual friend's party, at the vet with his new rescue. He is humbler. He is quieter. I don't know if he learned why he lost what he had, or if he simply learned how to perform contrition. People change, and sometimes they only change because the world made it too expensive not to. Amber. She looks older now. We never spoke beyond a grocery aisle apology, the kind that dissolves into polite emptiness. She had been, in a way, a symptom not a villain. Cheating rarely starts with the person who shows up midstream. It starts with a person who decides their performance matters more than another person's life. If you read this and are rooting for explosive revenge, I understand that thirst. We love the idea of theatrical justice because it's immediate and cathartic. But my revenge was different. It left me intact and his life subject to the realities he'd ignored. I woke up on my balcony with Cooper and tea, and the skyline looked the same as ever. The difference was internal, a lightness in my shoulders, A new line in my jaw. You don't always need to watch someone burn to know you've been victorious. Sometimes victory is making the choice to prioritize yourself when your heart has been used like a checking account. Sometimes it's teaching someone that the comfortable scaffolding they built on your soft edges can be removed. And sometimes, the silence after you leave is the loudest language of accountability. If this story hit close to home, share your experience in the comments. Did you ever withdraw your emotional labor and watch someone finally face themselves? Your voice matters here. If you liked this story, please like, share, and subscribe to Revenge Uncut. Help us reach 5,000 subscribers. Your support helps these stories be told. Remember, quiet boundaries can be the hardest, and the kindest, revenge.